The nurse barely looked up when Sarah collapsed in the emergency room waiting area, her face pale and sweat beading on her forehead. "Take a number," the woman said coldly, gesturing toward the overcrowded chairs. "We'll get to you when we can." What that nurse didn't know was that Sarah's husband had just written the largest check in the hospital's history. Sometimes the people who need compassion the most are the ones who get it the least. Sarah Martinez had never felt pain like this before. It started as a dull ache in her abdomen during breakfast, but by noon it felt like someone was twisting a knife inside her stomach. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She'd driven herself to Memorial General Hospital, the closest medical facility to her modest apartment downtown, hoping someone could help her understand what was happening to her body. The emergency room was busier than she'd ever seen it. Dozens of people filled the plastic chairs, some coughing, others holding ice packs to various injuries, many just staring at their phones while they waited. Sarah approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail was typing furiously on her computer. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly, her voice strained from the pain. "I need to see a doctor. I'm having severe abdominal pain." The receptionist, whose name tag read Linda, didn't bother looking up from her screen. "Fill out these forms," she said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. "Insurance card and ID. You'll be called when we're ready." Sarah took the clipboard with shaking hands and found an empty seat in the corner. The forms seemed endless, asking for information about her medical history, current medications, and emergency contacts. She filled in her husband's name, David Martinez, under the emergency contact section, along with his cell phone number. As she wrote, another wave of pain hit her so hard she had to grip the arm of her chair to keep from crying out. When she returned the completed forms to Linda, the receptionist barely glanced at them before tossing them into a pile with dozens of others. "Someone will call you," she said dismissively, already turning her attention to the next person in line. Sarah settled back into her chair and waited. The pain was getting worse, and she could feel nausea building in her throat. She checked her phone. 2:15 p.m. Surely they'd call her soon. An hour passed, then two. Sarah watched as people who had arrived after her were called back to see medical staff. When she approached Linda again to ask about the delay, the receptionist looked annoyed. "Ma'am, we operate on a triage system here. The most urgent cases get seen first. Your paperwork indicates stomach pain, which isn't exactly life-threatening. Please return to your seat." "But I've been waiting for over 2 hours," Sarah protested, her voice weak. "The pain is getting worse." Linda rolled her eyes. "Everyone thinks their case is urgent. If you were really in that much pain, you'd be in an ambulance, not driving yourself here in that beat-up Honda we saw you park." The comment stung. Sarah's car was old, yes, but it was reliable and she took good care of it. She didn't understand why that had anything to do with her medical needs, but she was too tired and sick to argue. She returned to her seat, noticing how Linda immediately became warm and accommodating when a well-dressed businessman approached the desk. Moments later, "Right this way, Mr. Henderson. Dr. Peterson is ready to see you now." Sarah had watched Mr. Henderson arrive just 20 minutes earlier, complaining of a minor headache. Now he was being ushered through the doors while she remained in agony in the waiting room. By 4 p.m., Sarah was struggling to sit upright. The pain had intensified to the point where she was having trouble breathing normally. She made her way back to the reception desk, where Linda was now chatting with another staff member about weekend plans. "Please," Sarah said, interrupting their conversation. "I really need to see someone. I think something might be seriously wrong." Linda looked her up and down with obvious irritation. "Look, honey, we've already explained how this works. You can't just jump ahead of everyone else because you're impatient." "I'm not being impatient," Sarah said, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm in genuine pain. I've been here for almost 4 hours." "4 hours isn't that long for a non-emergency case," Linda replied sharply. "If you don't like the wait time, you're free to go to urgent care down the street, though I doubt they'll see you any faster with that insurance." Sarah wasn't sure what Linda meant about her insurance, but the woman's tone made it clear she was being judged for something beyond her control. She tried calling her husband David, but it went straight to voicemail. He was probably in meetings all day as usual. Another hour passed. Sarah was now doubled over in her chair, trying not to vomit from the combination of pain and anxiety. She noticed a security guard named Marcus watching her with concern from across the room. Unlike the reception staff, he seemed genuinely worried about her condition. "Hey, you okay over there?" Marcus asked, walking over to her chair. "I don't think so," Sarah admitted. "I've been waiting 5 hours to see someone about this pain, and it keeps getting worse." Marcus frowned and glanced toward the reception desk. 5 hours? That seems excessive, even for a busy day. Let me talk to someone. Sarah watched as Marcus approached Linda and spoke to her in low tones. She could see Linda shaking her head and gesturing dismissively. When Marcus returned, he looked frustrated. "I'm sorry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story.
She says your case isn't priority and that you need to wait your turn like everyone else. But honestly, you look like you're in real distress. Maybe you should consider going somewhere else. The suggestion broke Sarah's heart. She'd come here seeking help and had been made to feel like a burden for hours. Now even the kind security guard was suggesting she leave. But she was too weak to drive anywhere else, and she feared the pain meant something serious was happening to her body. At around 6 p.m., a new nurse came on shift. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she appeared to be in her early 30s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. Jennifer began going through the waiting room, checking on patients who'd been there longest. When she reached Sarah, her expression immediately showed concern. "How long have you been waiting?" she asked. "About 6 hours," Sarah replied weakly. Jennifer's eyes widened. 6 hours? For abdominal pain? That's not acceptable. Let me check your paperwork. Sarah felt a surge of hope as Jennifer reviewed her forms. Finally, someone who seemed to care about her well-being. "Your pain level is marked as 8 out of 10, and you've been here since 2 p.m., Jennifer said, looking genuinely upset. "This should have been addressed hours ago. Let me talk to the charge nurse." But before Jennifer could act, Linda intercepted her. "That patient has been complaining all day," Linda said, loudly enough for other people in the waiting room to hear. "She's drug-seeking, if you ask me. Classic behavior. Claims severe pain, but drove herself here and has been coherent all afternoon." Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation. Drug-seeking? She'd never even taken prescription pain medication before, except once after dental surgery. The accusation was not only false, but devastating to hear in front of a room full of strangers. "I'm not seeking drugs," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want someone to tell me why I'm in so much pain." "Sure you do," Linda replied with a smirk. "They all say that." Jennifer looked uncomfortable with Linda's assessment, but seemed unsure how to challenge a more senior staff member. I'll make a note to have someone evaluate her soon," she said apologetically, before moving on to other patients. Sarah felt completely defeated. Not only was she being denied medical care, but now she was being labeled as a drug addict by people who had never even examined her. The shame was almost worse than the physical pain. As evening approached, Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate. She was now experiencing waves of nausea so severe she had to keep her head between her knees to avoid vomiting. Her hands were shaking, and she could feel cold sweats despite the warmth of the crowded waiting room. Around 7 p.m., Dr. Williams, the attending physician, happened to walk through the waiting area on his way to grab coffee. He noticed Sarah's obvious distress and stopped to observe her for a moment. Her pale complexion and labored breathing caught his attention immediately. "Excuse me, I'm Dr. Williams. How long have you been waiting?" 7 hours, Sarah managed to say between shallow breaths. Dr. Williams looked shocked. 7 hours? What's your chief complaint? "Severe abdominal pain. It started this morning and has been getting progressively worse." "And no one has examined you yet?" Dr. Williams asked, his voice rising slightly. Before Sarah could answer, Linda appeared at his side. "Doctor, that patient has been problematic all day. She's been demanding immediate attention and making a scene. We suspect she's drug-seeking based on her behavior and, well, her presentation." Dr. Williams looked between Linda and Sarah, clearly trying to assess the situation. What do you mean by her presentation? Linda lowered her voice, but not enough for Sarah to hear it. Look at her, doctor. Old clothes, beat-up car, probably doesn't have good insurance, classic profile for someone looking for a quick prescription. Sarah felt something break inside her chest. They were judging her medical needs based on her appearance and assumptions about her financial situation. She'd come here in good faith, seeking help for genuine pain, and was being treated like a criminal. Dr. Williams seemed to consider Linda's words. As a busy physician, he probably had to make quick judgments about patient priority, and he was being influenced by the assessment of his support staff. Well, if she's been stable for 7 hours, I suppose it can wait a bit longer. We have some critical cases that need immediate attention.
Of course, doctor, Linda said with satisfaction. We'll continue monitoring the situation. As Dr. Williams walked away, Linda gave Sarah a look that clearly conveyed her victory. The message was unmistakable. People like Sarah didn't deserve the same level of care as others. By 8 p.m., Sarah was struggling to remain conscious. The pain had reached a level she didn't know was possible, and she was having difficulty focusing her vision. She tried once more to call David, but again reached his voicemail. "David, it's me," she whispered into the phone. "I'm at Memorial General Hospital. I've been here for 8 hours, and they won't see me. I'm really scared. Please call me back." As she hung up, Sarah noticed Linda watching her with suspicion, as if even making a phone call was somehow evidence of wrongdoing. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness in her chair, while the waiting room gradually emptied and filled with new patients. Each time someone new arrived, she watched hopefully, thinking perhaps fresh eyes might see her situation differently. But the pattern continued. Well-dressed patients were seen quickly, while she remained invisible in her corner chair. Around 10 p.m., a young resident named Dr. Chang was making rounds and noticed Sarah slumped in her chair. Unlike the others, he didn't consult with Linda first. He approached Sarah directly and gently touched her shoulder. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked softly. Sarah struggled to open her eyes and focus on his face. I don't think so," she admitted. "I've been here for 10 hours. The pain is unbearable." Dr. Chang checked her pulse and immediately frowned. "Your heart rate is elevated and you're showing signs of dehydration. This isn't normal for someone with simple stomach pain. We need to get you examined right away." But as Dr. Chang began to help Sarah to her feet, Linda quickly intervened. "Doctor, I need to inform you about this patient. She's been flagged as potentially drug-seeking. She's been demanding attention all day and has been difficult." Dr. Chang looked at Linda with confusion. "Difficult how? She seems barely conscious." "She's been putting on an act. Trust me, I've been doing this for 15 years. I can spot them from a mile away." The young resident seemed torn between his medical instincts and the guidance of experienced staff. Unfortunately, in the hierarchy of hospital politics, he chose to defer to Linda's judgment. "I see," he said reluctantly. "Well, perhaps we should continue monitoring her for now." Sarah watched this exchange through a fog of pain and disbelief. Even when a doctor was willing to help her, the reception staff's prejudices were preventing her from receiving care. She felt utterly powerless and abandoned by the very system that was supposed to heal her. As midnight approached, Sarah's husband David finally returned her calls. His phone had died during his business meetings, and he'd only just gotten her messages when he plugged it in at his hotel room. "Sarah? Honey, what's wrong?" His voice was filled with concern and confusion. "I'm at Memorial General," she said weakly into the phone. "I've been here for 12 hours. They won't see me, David. Something's really wrong and they won't help me." 12 hours? David's voice rose in alarm. "That's impossible. Memorial General is one of the best hospitals in the state. There must be some mistake." "They think I'm drug-seeking," she whispered, not wanting Linda to overhear. They've been treating me like I'm lying about the pain." David was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "I'm coming right now. I'm getting on the first flight out. Hold on, sweetheart. I'm going to fix this." After hanging up, Sarah felt a small glimmer of hope for the first time all day. David would come, and somehow he'd make them understand that she was genuinely ill and needed help. She just had to survive until he arrived. But as the clock ticked past midnight and into the early morning hours, Sarah's condition continued to worsen. The pain was now so severe that she was having trouble breathing, and she could feel herself becoming increasingly disoriented. Whatever was happening to her body, it was progressing rapidly, and time was running out. Linda, meanwhile, seemed pleased with how she'd handled the situation. She had successfully prevented what she saw as a drug seeker from manipulating the medical staff, and she felt proud of her ability to spot trouble before it disrupted the hospital's operations. What Linda didn't know was that in just a few hours, everything she thought she understood about Sarah Martinez was about to be turned completely upside down. And the consequences of her assumptions would change not just Sarah's night, but the entire culture of Memorial General Hospital forever. At 3 a.m., David Martinez burst through the emergency room doors with the urgency of a man whose world was falling apart. He'd taken the red-eye flight from Chicago, calling the hospital repeatedly during the journey, only to be told each time that his wife was stable and waiting to be seen.
The casual dismissal in the staff's voices had filled him with dread. David spotted Sarah immediately, slumped in a corner chair, her skin ashen and her breathing shallow. She looked like she'd aged years in the span of hours. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "Sarah, sweetheart, I'm here," he whispered, taking her cold hand in his. "What have they done to you?" Sarah's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice. "David, you came?" she said weakly, her voice barely audible. "Of course I came. We're getting you help right now," David said, his jaw tightening as he surveyed her condition. He'd seen enough medical emergencies in his philanthropic work to recognize that his wife was in serious distress. David approached the reception desk where Linda was still on duty, now looking tired from her long shift, but maintaining her authoritative demeanor. "Excuse me, I need to speak with someone about my wife, Sarah Martinez. She's been here for 15 hours without receiving proper medical attention." Linda looked up at David with the same dismissive expression she'd worn all night. "And you are?" "I'm her husband, David Martinez. I want to know why she hasn't been examined by a physician." Linda's expression didn't change. She saw a man in wrinkled travel clothes who'd obviously rushed here in the middle of the night, probably just as broke as his wife. "Sir, your wife has been evaluated by our triage system. She's not presenting with emergency symptoms. We've explained this to her multiple times throughout the evening." "Not presenting with emergency symptoms?" David's voice rose slightly. "Look at her. She can barely stay conscious." "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice," Linda said sternly. "Your wife has been stable all night. If this were a true emergency, we would have acted accordingly. Perhaps you should consider taking her to urgent care instead." David stared at Linda in disbelief. He'd encountered bureaucratic obstacles before, but never when his wife's health was at stake. "I want to speak with the hospital administrator immediately." Linda scoffed. "The administrator isn't available at 3 a.m. for non-emergency situations. You can file a complaint during business hours if you'd like." At that moment, Dr. Williams happened to walk past the reception area. David intercepted him desperately. "Doctor, please, I need your help. My wife has been here for 15 hours with severe abdominal pain, and no one will examine her." Dr. Williams paused, recognizing David as the man he'd briefly encountered earlier. "Oh, yes, your wife. Linda briefed me on her case. We've been monitoring the situation closely." "Monitoring?" David's voice cracked with frustration. "She's in agony. Something is seriously wrong." "Sir, I understand your concern," Dr. Williams said in a patronizing tone. "But we have protocols here. Your wife's presentation doesn't indicate immediate intervention is necessary. These things take time." David felt something snap inside him. He'd spent years being diplomatic, understanding, and patient with people who didn't grasp the urgency of various situations. But this was his wife's life, and diplomacy had failed. "Do you know who I am?" David asked quietly, his voice taking on a different quality. Dr. Williams and Linda exchanged glances. Here it comes, Linda thought to herself. Another desperate family member trying to pull strings they don't have. "Sir, it doesn't matter who you are," Dr. Williams said firmly. "We treat all patients equally here, regardless of status or connections." "You treat all patients equally?" David repeated, his voice growing stronger. "Is that what you call leaving my wife in a chair for 15 hours while she deteriorates?" "Your wife is not deteriorating," Linda interjected. "She's been stable all evening. If you can't handle the wait time, perhaps you should have chosen a different hospital." David looked at both of them in a long moment, then pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. "Robert, it's David Martinez. I know it's late, but I need you at Memorial General immediately." "Yes, the hospital. I'll explain when you get here, but bring the contracts and the architectural plans."
Everything. Linda and Dr. Williams watched this exchange with growing annoyance. Great, Linda thought. Now he's trying to intimidate us with some lawyer friend who won't be able to do anything anyway. 20 minutes later, a distinguished man in an expensive suit hurried through the emergency room doors, carrying a briefcase and looking around urgently. He spotted David and approached quickly. "David, what's the emergency?" Robert asked, his voice filled with concern. "My wife has been sitting in that chair for over 15 hours without proper medical care," David said, pointing towards Sarah. "They think we're undesirable somehow." Robert's face darkened as he looked toward the reception desk, then back at David. "They don't know?" "Apparently not," David replied grimly. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. He approached Linda's desk with the bearing of a man accustomed to being taken seriously. "I'm Robert Chen, legal counsel for the Martinez Foundation," he announced formally. "I need to speak with your hospital administrator immediately." Linda looked unimpressed. "As I told Mr. Martinez, the administrator isn't available at this hour for non-emergency matters." "Then wake them up," Robert said firmly. "This is about the new pediatric wing." Something in Robert's tone made Dr. Williams pause. "The pediatric wing? What about it?" Robert looked at David, who nodded grimly. "Show them." Robert opened the folder and spread several documents across Linda's desk. "These are the architectural plans, construction contracts, and donation agreements from Memorial General's new pediatric wing, the wing that broke ground last month after receiving the largest single donation in this hospital's history." Dr. Williams leaned forward to examine the documents, his expression beginning to change as he read the headers and saw the dollar amounts. $57 million, Robert continued, his voice carrying across the reception area. "Donated by David and Sarah Martinez to build a state-of-the-art children's medical facility, the wing that will bear their names when it opens next year." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face had gone completely white as she stared at the documents spread before her. Dr. Williams looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "That's impossible," Linda whispered. She's what?" David asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Poor? Unworthy of medical care? Not important enough to be treated with dignity?" More staff members had gathered around, drawn by the commotion. Nurses, technicians, and other doctors were staring at the documents, then at David and Sarah, then back at the papers again. Dr. Williams found his voice first. "Mr. Martinez, I had no idea." "You had no idea because you never bothered to find out. You took one look at my wife and decided she wasn't worth your time. You let her suffer for 15 hours based on nothing but assumptions." "Sir, if we had known," Dr. Williams began. "If you had known what? That she was wealthy? That she was married to a major donor?" David's voice was rising now, carrying across the entire emergency department. "Should that matter? Should anyone have to prove their worth before receiving basic medical care?" Linda was frantically shuffling through Sarah's paperwork, as if she could somehow undo the night's events by finding the right form. "There must have been some miscommunication," she stammered. "The only miscommunication," Robert interjected, "was your assumption that someone's appearance determines their right to health care." At that moment, the hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Patricia Adams, hurried into the emergency department.
She'd received an urgent call about a situation involving the Martinez Foundation and had dressed quickly to come in. "Mr. Martinez, I came as soon as I heard. What's happening here?" David gestured toward Sarah, who was now barely conscious in her chair. "Your staff has denied my wife medical care for 15 hours because they decided she looked like someone who didn't deserve it."
Dr. Adams' face went ashen as she took in the scene. She knew exactly who David Martinez was and what his family's donation meant to the hospital. More importantly, she understood the legal and ethical nightmare that was unfolding. "Get me a trauma team now," she barked at the nearest nurse. "I want Mrs. Martinez in an examination room immediately." "Ma'am," Linda tried to interject, "we were following standard protocol." "Standard protocol?" Dr. Adams turned on Linda with fury. "Standard protocol is to provide medical care to people who need it, not to make judgments about their worthiness based on their clothing." As medical staff finally began attending to Sarah, rushing her to an examination room, David turned to address the crowd of hospital employees who had gathered. "My wife and I have given $57 million to this hospital because we believe in healthcare as a human right," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the department. "We funded research, equipment, and facilities because we want every person who walks through these doors to receive excellent care." He paused, looking directly at Linda and Dr. Williams. "What happened tonight is exactly the opposite of everything we hope to achieve. My wife nearly died in that chair while staff members made assumptions about her worth based on her appearance." Dr. Adams stepped forward, her face grave. "Mr. Martinez, I can't begin to express how sorry I am. This is not representative of our values or our mission." "Isn't it?" David asked pointedly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like your values in action." A few minutes later, Dr. Sarah Kim, the hospital's best emergency physician, emerged from Sarah's examination room with a grim expression. "Mr. Martinez, your wife has a ruptured appendix with signs of sepsis. She needs emergency surgery immediately. If she had gone much longer without treatment—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone present understood that Sarah could have died from a completely treatable condition because of the staff's prejudices. "How long would the surgery have taken if she'd been seen when she first arrived?" David asked. "Appendicitis caught early is usually a routine 45-minute procedure with a quick recovery," Dr. Kim replied. "Now, with the complications from the delay, she's looking at a much more complex surgery and weeks of recovery." David nodded slowly, then turned back to the assembled staff. 15 hours, he said quietly. 15 hours my wife sat in agony while you decided she wasn't worth your attention. 15 hours that turned a simple procedure into a life-threatening emergency. As Sarah was wheeled into surgery, David faced the group of hospital employees one final time. "The Martinez Foundation will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Memorial General. We'll be examining whether an institution that allows this kind of discrimination deserves our continued support." Dr. Adams looked panicked. "Mr. Martinez, surely we can work through this. This was an isolated incident." "Was it?" David asked pointedly. "How many other patients have been judged and dismissed because they didn't look wealthy enough? How many people have suffered unnecessarily because your staff makes assumptions about who deserves care?" The questions hung in the air without answers, but everyone present knew the truth. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of behavior that had finally been exposed. Linda, who had started the night feeling confident about her ability to spot troublemakers, now sat behind her desk in stunned silence. Her 15 years of experience had taught her to make quick judgments about people, but those judgments had nearly cost someone their life. Dr. Williams, who had deferred to Linda's assessment without conducting his own examination, was realizing that his own biases had made him complicit in Sarah's suffering. As the sun began to rise over Memorial General Hospital, David sat in the surgical waiting room, surrounded by hospital administrators who were desperately trying to manage the crisis. But his focus was entirely on his wife, fighting for her life in an operating room because people had decided she didn't look important enough to save. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The woman they had dismissed as unworthy of care was married to the man whose generosity had made their jobs possible. But more than that, she was a human being who had deserved dignity and treatment regardless of her husband's wealth or status. Hours later, when Dr. Kim emerged from surgery with the news that Sarah would recover fully, David felt relief wash over him. But he also felt something else, a determination to ensure that no other patient would ever endure what his wife had experienced. The Martinez Foundation's donation had been intended to help children receive better medical care. Now it would also fund sensitivity training, policy changes, and oversight programs to ensure that every patient, regardless of appearance or perceived status, would be treated with the respect and care they deserved. Sarah's 15-hour nightmare in the emergency room had ended, but its impact on Memorial General Hospital was just beginning. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most painful experiences. And this lesson would reshape how an entire institution thought about the true meaning of healthcare.